Have you ever wanted to fix a problem by making a whip and start throwing tables upside down? You know, I bet all of us probably have had moments like that, right? Where we would like to kind of resolve something with that kind of force. But here's the problem between us and that scene that we just read out of John chapter 2. He was Jesus and we are not. And Jesus understood perfectly how it was that he could handle that situation, and within the authority and power that he had to deal with that situation, he could fix that problem of those who would turn the temple into a place of merchandise rather than a place of worship to God. He had every right, authority, and ability to discern exactly what was appropriate and not appropriate in that scene in order to resolve the problem that was before him. The problem is we don't have his wisdom at all times. We don't have his authority ever, and we don't know all the time how it is that we ought to fix or address particular problems that might be before us. And the truth of the matter is, you and I probably at times have chosen the wrong ways to address a problem. We picked the wrong method, the wrong answer, the wrong response, the wrong path. The problem was real, the situation was real, and it may needed resolved, but we chose something in the wrong way. Now, we've got some folks going to do some renovations for us. Jason's actually with us this morning, worshiping with us this morning, going to do this work for us this week. And it had me thinking, and Jason, this isn't a reminder to you, but it is. Be careful how you fix a problem, right? Be careful how you go about trying to address a challenge, a difficulty, a problem that you might run into, because the truth of the matter is the fix might be worse than the problem itself if you're not careful. And I thought about that spiritually, and I thought about that biblically, and I want to share with you 3 examples of where there were men in Scripture who had a problem, but they went about it entirely the wrong way, and because they did that, they created more problems than they had to begin with. And let's begin in 1 Kings chapter 14. In 1 Kings chapter 14, and I want you to notice the example of Rehoboam, and I'm just going to walk through these texts with you this morning in our study and share some examples as we can learn from them, and I'll show you on the screen what verses I'm in. And so when you see verses on your screen, that's referencing to the chapter that's on the top of the screen rather than printing the whole thing out. 1 Kings chapter 14, verse 21. He said, "And Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, reigned in Judah. And Rehoboam was 41 years old when he became king, and he reigned 17 years in Jerusalem, the city which the Lord had chosen of all the tribes of Israel to put his name there. His mother's name was Naamah, an Ammoritess. Now Judah did evil in the sight of the Lord, and they provoked him to jealousy with their sins which they committed more than all that their fathers had done. For they also built for themselves high places, sacred pillars, and wooden images on every high hill and under every green tree." They've got a problem in Judah, don't they? And the problem is they've decided that idolatry is okay. And they have decided that God isn't the only one that should be worshiped in Jerusalem, even though He had placed His name on that place. They had decided that any kind of worship was okay, and from the top down, the people had been led into idolatrous behaviors. In fact, verse 24 simply says, "And there were also perverted persons in the land. And they did according to all the abominations of the nations which the Lord had cast out before the children of Israel." It's interesting, right? Because God said, listen, we're going to behave differently. You are a sanctified people. We're not going to just worship any God that you want to choose to worship. You're going to worship me only. And I'm the only true God worthy of any kind of worship. And He helped them as He conquested the land to be able to create barriers, if you will, between them and the idolatrous nations round about them. But they chose to adopt the behaviors of those nations. And they chose to begin to worship those idols like the nations round about them had been worshiping. And the problem just continues to fester and create more and more difficulty. Notice what happens, verse 25. "So it happened in the 5th year of King Rehoboam that Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem. And he took away the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasure of the king's house. He took away everything. He also took away all the gold shields which Solomon had made." So this king of Egypt, Shishak, comes up into Jerusalem. And Jerusalem, through the behaviors of Rehoboam, has been so weakened that he's able to come and actually begin to take the treasures of the land. He's able to come in and just take for himself the things that Solomon had created for the purpose of worship and honor to God. And yet the people don't recognize initially here why it is they were vulnerable. They don't really recognize why it is they had become weakened to the point that they were able to allow for this Egyptian king to come in and begin to squander the things that King David had, or King Solomon rather, had provided. If you notice back in chapter 10, just run you out of chapter 14 for a moment. But in chapter 10 of 1 Kings, notice in verse 17, that this is what Solomon had done. He also made 300 shields of hammered gold. 3 minas of gold went into each shield. The king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. And so he had recognized how important, in a sense, that this symbolism of power and even wealth at times and authority that Solomon had. You can study and read about how great a man Solomon was, even in the world's eyes, of how the greatness of Solomon had spread. But these are the same shields we're talking about over in chapter 14, by the way. And these ones that Solomon had made with some of the finest gold that you can find, and he didn't have 1 or 2 of them. He made 300 of those things. And now the king of Egypt has come in and he's decided, I'll just take those. And rather than lament, and rather than realize how sad that was, rather than consider and think about how it is we might be able to resolve this vulnerability that we've created among the people, notice back chapter 14 what he did to try to fix the problem. So verse 27 of 1 Kings chapter 14. Then King Rehoboam made bronze shields. That's your answer. You've lost that which Solomon had provided for you and all the grandeur that went along with that, and your response to that is to make some, not of gold, but make some bronze shields in their place, and committed them to the hands of the captains of the guard who guarded the doorway of the king's house. And whenever the king entered the house of the Lord, the guards carried them, then brought them back into the guard room. Solomon had built these shields of gold, placed them in a prominent place, and people would come into that forest of Lebanon. They would be able to recognize and see the authority and power of that king whose God was the God of heaven. Now that those have been taken away from them, Rehoboam's answer is, let's just make some lesser expensive ones and we'll give them to the guards to take care of, and they can just keep them in the guard's house in temporary form. And then when I happen to come to the temple, he can bring those out and we'll have a parade and a show, and then they'll take them back to the guard's house when we're done. It's a feigned, weak, empty effort to fix the problem. Why is it that Rehoboam can't recognize that it's the idolatry that has caused their difficulties and problems? Fix the problem of borrowing from the nations round about you, Rehoboam. Fix the problem of a people who had abandoned God and wanted to worship other gods and build high places and build altars to those gods. Fix the problem. And to resolve the problem wasn't just to make some replacement shields for the ones that were stolen by Shishak. The problem wasn't just make us some bronze one. They're lesser expensive. If we lose those, then we won't lose all the value of 300 gold shields. They're trying to fake their way through this situation. And that's not at all what God was desiring from them. What's your point, Brian? My point is, friends, sometimes when we have situations in front of us that need resolved, problems that need addressed, sometimes we throw feigned efforts at it. We're not really trying to address the real problem. We're just trying to cover it up a little bit, make it look better. We're trying to in some ways, give it a more picturesque look so that it doesn't look quite as bad. Right? Oh, sure, we lost all those gold shields. But look, when I come to the temple, I've got some new ones now. We'll keep those over in the guard shack. And when I come down and parade before the people, we'll make sure that everybody can see them to know that we haven't completely lost everything. We haven't lost complete control over here. They're not addressing the problem. Sometimes spiritually, we do the same thing. we try to, what we often call smoke and mirrors, right? We try to deflect and try to make something look different than it actually is. We try to make something look maybe not as bad as that. No, let's just address the problem, right? For them, the problem's idolatry. Let's fix that problem, Rehoboam. And it starts with you. Let's get rid of the high places. Some of the kings that later come along, they'll do that, by the way. We'll talk about one before we're done today. But what happened with Rehoboam was he tried to fix a problem by just making it look better. And the problem just continued to fester. And the people became weaker. And the challenges that were created because of his decision-making didn't help anything. Friends, the first step in fixing a problem is admitting what the real issue is. And the real issue wasn't that the 300 gold shields are gone. The real issue is we have become weakened by our sinful choices. And when we make recognition of that, now I can actually fix it. Now I can actually address the problem. Admit what the real issues are. And sometimes we're troubled by things and we're challenged by things and we're trying to find a pathway through it, and we're looking at feigned efforts, superficial ways that don't ever really address the real problem. Go into 2 Chronicles chapter 28. Let me share a different example with you. 2 Chronicles chapter 28. I'm going to look at Ahaz for a moment with you. And here's another interesting example, right? There's some real issues, some real problems that they ought to be talking about and trying to find answer to, but again, they're looking behind it. The first problem Ahaz has, that's hard to say, by the way. The first problem Ahaz had, I'll put it in past tense, that's easier, is that he's trying to appease the problem rather than fix the problem. Notice verse 19. For the Lord brought Judah low because of Ahaz, king of Israel, for he had encouraged moral decline in Judah and had been continually unfaithful to the Lord. I don't know about you, that's not a great epitaph, is it? You know, a fella, he's listed here as somebody who's just been continually failing in his relationship with the Lord, and he's been leading others to go down the same path. Not a great sign for him. Also, Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, came to him and distressed him and did not assist him. So you got the king of Syria coming in. He's causing problems for Ahaz, and I want you to notice what he does about it. For Ahaz took part of the treasures from the house of the Lord, from the house of the king, and from the leaders, and he gave it to the king of Assyria, but he did not help him. He tried to appease the enemy. He takes that which belonged to the Lord, right? Whose house is that? Right? That temple belonged to the Lord. It was the place God had placed His name on. It was the place that He had designed and purposed for His worship and to honor Him. It wasn't a place for Ahaz to go and get what was left of the treasures and start trying to bribe kings with the wealth that was from that place. And because he attempted to appease his enemies rather than addressing the problems that he had with those enemies and the situation of his failures as a leader, he hasn't fixed anything. I thought a lot about that initial couple of verses in this process, and I thought, how many times have we been guilty of that? Now, maybe we don't have an enemy that's trying to come in and distress us in the same fashion that Ahaz has. But what I want you to appreciate is the fact, though, that we sometimes try to attempt to appease a problem rather than fix a problem. And we've got a situation here or a situation there or somebody who's leading me in wrong ways or behaving in ways that they shouldn't, and we're attempting to appease that. And they don't change a bit. The New Testament writer said, reprove, rebuke, exhort with all long-suffering and doctrine. Right? When there are those who are choosing to dishonor God, when there are those who fail to follow in the paths that God would want them in, the Bible teaches us that there's time sometimes for reproof, sometimes correction's necessary, sometimes rebuke is necessary. There are methods, means by which for us to try to help and lead people away from their choices. appeasing their behaviors isn't one of them. But that's what Ahaz tried to do. Pleaser, I'll never say that again today, but he tried to appease a king like that. And you can almost hear the king laughing as he brings the treasures from the house of God and lays them before the king of Syria, and you could almost hear him laughing, going, I'm going to take his gold, but I'm not going to change my behaviors at all. And sometimes we do the same things with problems that we have before us. We're just trying to appease them, and we're not actually addressing them. In fact, he found no place for real change. Notice verse 22. Now, in the time of his distress, King Ahaz became increasingly unfaithful to the Lord. This is that. King Ahaz. Interesting way to say that, isn't it? You would think that at some point he would realize that he's part of the problem. And appeasing the kings that are distressing him isn't going to be an answer. To try to take that which belongs to the Lord and give it to somebody who doesn't have right to it isn't the answer. You would think that at some point the bells and whistles would go off in his head and he would realize, I've got a real problem here with my failures towards the Lord. That's what I need to fix. And he would begin to address that. But the text tells us he just got worse. Yeah, that's what happens. When you try to appease a problem rather than address a problem, it just gets worse. When you don't admit to the realities and recognize the real situation that's going on, the idolatry, the wickedness, the abominations before the Lord, those were the real problems. Let's fix those, Ahaz. Let's fix those problems. But even though his efforts failed, he still became more and more unfaithful to the Lord. And can I encourage us this morning to let that be a warning to all of us? It is absolutely possible for any and all of us at times to, in the process of in our minds thinking, I'm trying to address this situation in front of me, I'm trying to resolve this problem, and I'm actually just digging myself deeper and deeper and deeper. Be honest about that. Be honest about those moments where I'm just creating more problems for myself, and all the while I'm becoming more unfaithful in the process rather than getting closer to God. You can't appease a problem to fix it. We have to address the realities of it. Verse 23. Notice, for he sacrificed to the gods of Damascus, which had defeated him, saying, because the gods of the kings of Syria helped them, I will sacrifice to them that they may help me. But they were the ruin of him and of all Israel. He's bowing down and worshiping the gods because he thinks, well, they're apparently on the side of the Syrians now. Apparently they like that group of guys better than they like me. I'll start worshiping them, and it became the greater ruin of Ahaz in the process. Don't ever convince yourself that sin is winning. Those are deceptive appearances. Don't ever convince yourself that to fix a problem that's in front of me is to give in to sinful choices and sinful behaviors because those seem to be winning. No. Smoke and mirrors. They're not really winning. And if I choose a path like Ahaz does to start worshiping the idols of those folks over in Syria because that seems like that's helping them out, then all I've done is created greater ruin for myself in the process. And then notice verse 24. So Ahaz gathered the articles of the house of God, cut in pieces the articles of the house of God, shut up the doors of the house of the Lord, and made for himself altars in every corner of Jerusalem. And you imagine that he has decided that the right answer here is not just to abandon God, not just to worship the kings or the gods of Syria and Damascus, rather than the Lord of heaven. But he decides that what his best answer here would be is, let me just chop all the rest of the treasures that are left here that I haven't already pondered off on somebody. Let me chop those up, and I'm going to go into the four corners of Jerusalem. I'm going to establish altars for people to worship at, and I'm just going to shut the doors to the house of God. And in every single city of Judah, he made high places to burn incense to other gods and provoke to anger the Lord God of his fathers. Have you ever had a problem you're trying to fix and resolve? And even though every indication is telling you that you are not going about it the right way, you are determined that you are going to stay the course. This is the way it's going to be fixed no matter what. And no matter what evidence is in front of me, no matter what situation is presented to me, no matter what new information is provided for me, I have chosen this is the course. That's Ahaz. Trying to buy and bribe kings didn't work, but he kept doing it. Worshiping other gods didn't work, but he kept doing it. And every step of the way, it just got worse and worse and worse. And he was so determined and so obstinate and so filled with pride that this is the way I'm going to resolve this, that nothing got better and everything just continually got worse. Friends, if it's obvious in front of me, and there's evidence in front of me that my effort to resolve a conflict, a situation, a problem, my effort to resolve a spiritual need that I have, that whatever I'm trying to fix and resolve isn't going well, be honest about that. And not just dig my heels in and become obstinate to everything and every thought and everything that's been presented before me and say, no, this is how I'm going to deal with it. He became obstinate, and look what happened to the people because of it. Jump over one chapter. Let's look at Hezekiah for a minute. In 2 Chronicles chapter 29, you want to know how to really resolve a problem? Here you go. Here you go. Rehoboam, not the way. Ahaz just created more problems than they had to start with. But look at Hezekiah. Verse 3, 2 Chronicles 29. In the first year of his reign. First year of his reign, in the what? In the first month, he opened the doors of the house of the Lord and repaired them. In other words, the very first thing Hezekiah did was got people out of the four corners of Jerusalem worshiping other gods and got the doors to the house of the Lord opened up and the repairs beginning to be made so that the people could come back and start honoring God as He deserved to be worshiped. The first answer to fixing a problem is prioritize the problem. Right? Prioritize the problem. First year, first month, we've got to get back to worshiping God. We need that building back open. We need to fix it in order so it can happen. Then, he brought in the priests and the Levites and gathered them into the east square and said to them, "Hear me, Levites." I'll accept the English emphasis with an exclamation point. What I mean by that is, that's how he said it. Listen to me, right? There's emphasis here. Listen to me. Sanctify yourselves. Sanctify the house of the Lord God of your fathers and carry out the rubbish from the holy place. First order of business, Hezekiah says to these Levites, these leaders among the people, get yourselves right. Right? Sanctify yourselves. You guys need to get your minds, your behaviors, your choices. You need to get back to what you should be doing. If we're going to fix the people, the problems among the nations, if we're going to get them out of the four corners of Jerusalem and all the idolatry, then we've got to have a place for them to go to worship. Let's get the house fixed. And we've got to have leaders that are dedicated to God in the right way. The problems are different, but they're parallel. When the Lord's house, which in the New Testament is the church, when the Lord's body is challenged, when it has difficulties, when it has problems, first step, prioritize. What's the problem? And what do we need to do to begin to process it? What's second level is let's get people on board, those who need to be leading, those who need to be examples. And let's get them to start setting the right examples before the people so that we can start beginning to worship and honor God in the right ways. What's the next step? The next step is to get rid of any of the hindrances. Into verse 5, he said to the Levites, get into that house, get those doors open, repair that building, and anything that doesn't belong there, get it out of there. Get the rubbish out of there, he said. Sometimes, folks, the answer to the problem is to remove whatever it is that's causing the problem. Right? Sometimes we try to fix a problem, but we try to fix it while the problem is still present. And I don't necessarily mean people. Sometimes you can't get away from every person you'd like to. But we can find ways to remove whatever it is, whatever influence, whatever situation that is being put before us that keeps distracting us. Verse 6, for our fathers, here's the reason. He understood the problem. For our fathers have trespassed and done evil in the eyes of the Lord, your God, our God. They have forsaken Him. They've turned their faces away from the dwelling place of the Lord and turned their backs on Him. They have also shut up the doors of the vestibule, put out the lamps, and have not burned incense or offered burnt offerings in the holy place to the God of Israel. Therefore the wrath of the Lord fell upon Judah and Jerusalem, and He was given them up to trouble, to desolation, and to jeering, as you see with your own eyes. Hezekiah says what the real problem here, folks, is not that we didn't bow down to the gods of the Syrians. The problem is we didn't run out of money, don't have enough gold to keep appeasing our enemies. Our problem is we've let idolatrous worship, we've let evil influence begin to affect us, and our fathers led us down this path. We've got to get off of that path and get back on the right track. And we're having problems, and we're suffering defeat, and we're facing the wrath of God because of our own choices. Not because Shishak, not because Tiglath-Pileser from Syria were more powerful. Because we have abandoned our God. For indeed, verse 9, because of this our fathers have fallen by the sword, and our sons and our daughters and our wives are in captivity. We're the problem. Right? Hezekiah said, we're the problem. It's because we've abandoned God and we've turned our backs. Friends, God doesn't promise that everything will be perfect in your life. That you'll never have a struggle, you'll never have a problem, never have a tragedy. Right? Those aren't guaranteed promises from God. But I can tell you this. When we abandon God, nothing gets better. When we abandon God and leave Him behind, things don't get better. They get worse. And we have biblical example after example of how that was. He understood the real problem, and he understood the real solution. Verse 10, now it is in my heart to make a covenant with the Lord God of Israel, that His fierce wrath may turn away from us. It's time to make a covenant with the Lord again. It's time to honor God again. It's time to make Him the focus of my life again. It's time to put Him in proper priority in my life again. That's the answer. If I'm struggling with a spiritual challenge, if I'm troubled by things that are hindering my faith and my service and my honoring of God, the real answer and the real solution is admit that's the problem, and then renew my covenant with God and my commitment and my convictions in relationship to Him. And if you skip down into verse 15, you'll find he put those words to action. They gathered their brethren, sanctified themselves, and went according to the commandment of the king, at the words of the Lord, to cleanse the house of the Lord. Then the priests went into the inner part of the house of the Lord to cleanse it, and brought out all the debris that they found in the temple of the Lord to the court of the house of the Lord. And the Levites took it out and carried it to the brook Kidron. Now they began to sanctify on the first day of the first month, and on the 8th day of the month they came to the vestibule of the Lord. So they sanctified the house of the Lord in 8 days. And on the 16th day of the first month they finished. We can devise great plans. If we don't live up to them, if we don't implement them, if we don't put them into action, they're of no value. Hezekiah could know all the right answers to fix the problem, and he could talk to the Levites about what it would be in order to address it. He could do all of those things, lay out the greatest of plans. If you don't fulfill those plans, if you don't activate those plans, if you don't put words to action, they're meaningless. What I love about this account and the exact contrast between men like Ahaz and Hezekiah is Hezekiah knew what the real problem was. He admitted the real problem. He found real solutions, and he put those real solutions into practice. And when you begin to read from verses 20 through 36 of that chapter, you'll find that they're back into the house of the Lord worshiping Him. And the things necessary to worship Him in the right ways, they committed themselves to. Friends, this morning, can I encourage all of us to be careful how we fix a problem? Be wise in the choices that we make to address a problem, a circumstance that we might find ourselves in. And that's true in life, I suppose, and in various things that we might find our hands in. But it's especially true spiritually. If I'm troubled spiritually, ask myself, what's the real problem? How do I need to address that problem without just trying to appease it or buy it off or put pictures on it to make it look better? And am I ready to make a new conviction, a greater commitment, a greater covenant with the God of heaven to start honoring Him in better ways? How can we encourage you in that this morning? Can we help you make that choice to honor God? To be the Hezekiah. Was he a perfect man? No, we could have kept reading his story. He's got some flaws and problems. But he's a great example of how to address real problems. And you and I may need to address our challenges by simply saying, I need to be of greater commitment to the Lord. I need to be of greater conviction. I need to start living my faith, not talking about my faith. And if that call is touching your heart today, if we could help you, strengthen you, encourage you, then what can we do to help you this morning spiritually? Won't you come as we stand and as we sing?